Welcome to Musicians Roundtable. Today we have as our guest David Leisner. David is a renowned guitarist, distinguished teacher, and now the author of a very significant, in my view, and wonderful book called Playing with Ease, which delves into many of the deeper issues about playing the guitar at one's best with most fulfillment. So David, welcome.
Thank you.
And let's begin. I just wanted to begin and ask you, how did this book come about? What is the sense of origin, and what is your orientation that you could offer to us about that?
Well, the book is really over 40 years of teaching condensed into a small volume. I've been teaching these ideas about making playing easier and how to pay attention to your body virtually all my teaching life. And of course, as one goes along in the teaching process, one refines as one goes, and it gets more and more honed down, not only the way that you describe something, but the ideas themselves. And that has happened, in fact, over 40 years. And then, of course, in some relatively recent years, from 1984 to 1996, I suffered from focal dystonia, which, as many people know, is a painless condition where fingers curl into the palm without control and without pain. I said painless. And it took me 12 years to fix it, first trying to get other people to fix it, and then getting myself to fix it. And in the course of fixing it, I came across some ideas about using the large muscles, engaging those large muscles to support what the smaller ones are doing. And by doing this, I not only fixed myself and ultimately a number of other people focal dystonia, but I also filled in the missing pieces of the puzzle that I didn't have over those 40-some years of teaching. So with those ideas in place, it occurred to me, early on after my cure in 1996, that this is something I should write a book about or do a video about at some point. And it has been quite a journey of a number of years trying to figure out what shape that would take. And finally, I decided I would write a book, preferably a book that had some video support to it. And I was fortunate enough to find Oxford University Press as my partner in crime. And they immediately said they loved the idea of the book, and it happened to fit into what they were doing at the time. And so it was just a kind of a lovely confluence of events that finally gave birth to this book.
Yes, I've benefited so much already in the time that I've had to look at your book. And particularly what is useful, as you mentioned, is the book that has a website, and within the website there are a whole series of detailed videos that illustrate many of the subject matters. The book itself has cues as to, for example, in chapter 4, see video number 3. And so that way, as someone is reading it, they can just go online, look at the video, and then return to the text. And I find that integration of multimedia extremely useful, and I think many will benefit from that.
I'm glad to hear that. The videos are all quite short, and they're anywhere from 30 seconds to 3 minutes long. And so the idea being that you have enough to demonstrate what's expressed in the book, but not so much time taken away that you can't just go right back to the book and continue reading.
Yes, I think that works out very well. So in the book, there are 7 different chapters and subject headings, and I thought it might be helpful just to review basically the subject and the content of each of the chapters. So chapter 1 is titled Your Body and Your Instrument, Principles. And can you tell us what that chapter consists of?
Well, the first two chapters both are called Your Body and Your Instrument, and the first chapter is about basic principles or abstract principles. So it's basically, well, let's put it this way. Guitarists and most instrumentalists in general tend to think about the instrument and, of course, the music, but they tend to think less about their body and their anatomy and what it needs. So much of what this book is about is paying attention to the body and what it needs. And in order to understand what the body needs, you need to understand its language. So this first chapter of Basic Principles sort of makes some basic definitions, the things about the language of movement. For example, movement occurs at the joints. And that's a very important thing to know. So what are the joints? Well, there's the top joint of the finger and the middle joint and the tip joint. Then there's the wrist joint, of course, and then the elbow joint, the shoulder joint, the hip joint, and so on and so forth. And these are the places from which we move and with which we move. And so understanding that, first of all, is very important. And then to understand how they move best at those joints, what those joints require for movement is a very important thing to know. So for example, to know that joints work best in their mid-range of motion as opposed to the extremes. So for example, with fingers, again, I can show it easily on the screen. Let's see, I guess that's the best way. This is flexing and this is extending. And this is in the mid-range. Somewhere in here is the mid-range. So understanding that mid-range concept for each of the joints that are important in the body for playing an instrument is a very important thing and has huge repercussions. So that first chapter deals with those kinds of basics. And then I suppose I can move on to the second chapter, which is about your body and your instrument again, but now we talk about specifics. So in speaking about specifics, I'm speaking about the body going from head to toe, for instance, dealing with the head. How does the head move correctly, particularly in terms of how does it move correctly on top of the spine? And where is the top of the spine? Very important thing to know. It happens to be here in the middle of your head, just at the bottom of your ears, but right in the center of your head. That little piece of knowledge alone is a huge thing. And then you want to learn how to move the head correctly on top of the spine. And then you come down to your neck and you deal with the neck and aspects of the neck and down into the shoulder and the chest and so on and so forth, and sitting bones and all those details are all dealt with to great detail in that second chapter. So it really fills you in on a lot of specifics that you may have begun to wonder about in the first chapter.
Yes, and I think that this applies not only to those chapters, but throughout the book. One of the things that I think that will make this book very useful to people, not just for a one-time read, but for going back and forth over many sessions over a long period of time, is that, and I appreciate this, that what you offer is a series of explanations and orientation to a kind of a thinking about the whole body, so that each person and everyone's body is different, each person can look at the principles and see how they might apply to themselves or to their own students, and also to explore whether in agreement or disagreement with some of your points, but there's a foundation level that I think is quite valuable. I do appreciate that.
Thank you.
You, yeah, in the next couple chapters, look into the right and the left hand mechanics. So could you go over the right and left hand mechanics
Sure.
chapters?
Well, basically, first of all, I use the word mechanics to distinguish from the word technique. Excuse me. What I mean by mechanics as opposed to technique is that technique is mechanics applied to music. Mechanics plus music equals technique. Mechanics plus a musical goal equals technique. Mechanics itself is something that you can talk about abstractly, away from the music, across the board. And again, these are things that are that come out of a basic understanding of and knowledge of how the body works and how it works at its maximum efficiency and happiness in general. So with that in mind, I approach right-hand mechanics in this kind of abstract way and discuss a lot of basic things to my approach to right-hand mechanics, which may be similar or different to yours or someone else's. And the same, of course, is true in the chapter on the left hand. And I don't for a moment think that anybody is going to agree 100% with all of my ideas about mechanics, especially. However, what I do want to convey in the book is that all of these ideas are part of a system of understanding. And that system arises from a knowledge of and understanding of the body. And also some knowledge of just physics of sound as well. That's an element there as well. So those things all work together. And so the point of view that I present in both of these chapters is one of presenting a system of ideas.
Yes, I think that comes through very well. And those chapters are particularly well supplemented and expanded by the videos that you use to demonstrate each of the different ideas.
Great, good to hear.
Now, one of the most interesting chapters, and I think that it's fundamental to the whole approach, is the chapter 5, How to Play with the Large Muscles. And can you go over that? Because that's not something that's the large muscle concept and application that you delineate in the book is not something that I think you find in many other methods or technique books. So can you discuss that a bit for us?
Well, my feeling is that these ideas about large muscle engagement are somewhat radical in the guitar world and quite new. I have found out in the meantime that there apparently have been a number of other people in various pockets around the world who have come up with similar ideas. But I think I don't know enough about them to know how methodically they pursued it. But the ideas here are quite different than how most people play. Most people play by using their smaller muscles. And when we're talking about smaller muscles, we're talking about the forearm muscles and the muscles in the hand. Of course, there are no muscles in the fingers at all. But the smaller muscles, especially in the forearm, are the ones that tend to get misused or overused. And the ones further up in the armpit and even up into the upper back and even down into the lower back, those are ones that are not engaged in general. And so this chapter goes into quite some detail, particularly with the help of those supporting videos, in describing how to access the larger muscles, particularly the ones that you'll find in your armpit. They seem to be the intersection of the teres minor muscles, which are crescent-shaped muscles across the across your back here. I don't know if you can see. And then the latissimus dorsi muscles are the V-shaped muscles that go up the side of your back, very large muscles. The intersection of those muscles are the large muscles in particular that I am talking about in the book, How to Access It. And everything in this chapter especially is approached by way of exaggeration. So, for instance, to get yourself just to begin to understand how to use the large muscles, I talk about swinging the arm from the elbow joint up towards your face, sort of, if I can demonstrate like this, and striking the string on the way. And just by doing that alone, a very simple motion, one begins to access large muscles. And then from there, I get more and more refined as the chapter goes along. Again, it's really important to exaggerate everything in the beginning because the large muscles can be quite elusive for most instrumentalists and certainly for guitarists. So by emphasizing exaggerated motion in the beginning and then eventually talking about more refined motion and smaller motion, faster movement, and so on and so forth, one gets back to normal playing ultimately using both small muscles and large muscles to support the small ones. And together, that makes a very nice team.
Yes, I think that's something that I have found very fascinating to contemplate and to explore. And it brings to mind just this, something that I think that we see in all kinds of performance activities of the human body. It's not just the guitar, the piano, or the violin, but it would be in baseball or basketball, sports and dancing and so forth. And it seems to me that the finest performers, the finest dancers and athletes use their whole body. And if you take some of the concepts of your book and observe what we can see just on TV or live performances, you can see that the great athletes have a seamless, full use of the body that feels very open. And I think that the results then speak for themselves.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, in fact, athletes and dancers, they almost cannot work without the use of the large muscles. If they do, they get in a lot of trouble, a lot of injury, as is true for instrumentalists. But it's even more true for someone like an athlete or a dancer who has to use their large muscles because they are using their whole body.
Yeah. So that's a very big, important chapter. And that's something that those who have the good fortune for themselves to explore your book will have a serious study, contemplation, checking things out, going back to the book again and again, and that will, I think, bring great benefit to many of us teachers who are working, and also, of course, to the students that may have constrictions and limitations that are utterly mysterious to them and to their teachers. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a really important and useful chapter.
That's lovely, thank you. And I really hope that the book will be a kind of slow revelation to most people. That it becomes one revelation after another, and they take it in slowly. And hopefully in a cumulative way, so that if they do take their time, as you suggest, and I also suggest in the book, then that the revelations build on each other in a friendly way and not in any kind of confronting way, so that these revelations become your new friends. That's my hope.
Oh, yes, I think that will be the result for many. Now, the last two chapters are chapters that extend the discussion. And so chapter 6 is suggestions for relaxed and effective practice. And this, of course, is a subject that could be a whole book in and of itself. But I think in your book, you've distilled it to some very useful and important concepts. Could you go over a bit of that chapter for us?
Sure. I mean, as you say, the subject is endless, and there are some fabulous books written on the subject. And I mention a couple in the book as well. In this case, of course, I'm talking about practice suggestions with a particular eye to playing with ease. So finding practice suggestions that are that contribute to an easy approach to playing and to making music. One of the essential points of view that I have is about thinking of practicing as a combination of what I call soul work and analytical work. Analytical work is what most of us do most of the time when we practice, working on the nitty-gritty aspects of practicing, getting all those detailed kinks out of the piece. The soul work is sometimes what people do too much of or too little of, which is to say, just playing through the piece and just getting a sense of the overall, the gestalt, the bird's eye view of a piece. It's very important to go back and forth between the soul work and the analytical work. And I speak in some detail in this chapter about spending time very narrowly on one and then spending time narrowly on the other, most of the time being spent in the detailed analytical work and very little of the time being spent on the soul work, which kind of is a checks and balances kind of system, where the soul work kind of checks what you've done with your analytical work, and then you know how to work next with the next session of analytical work. Mm-hmm. And so in terms of the analytical stuff, there are a zillion ways one can do that kind of work. And I speak about dotted rhythm practice, which is very familiar to many people, although I add a few different ways of thinking about it. Manuel Barrueco's wonderful idea about right hand alone practice, which I also believe is very effective. Thinking about the details of solving problems in particular spots, narrowing it down to questions like where, what, and how, and dealing with those specifics. Dealing with, so many things. I don't know, I have to look at my book to remember. There's so many details for practice tempos, working with a metronome, practicing backwards, organization of the practice day. Those kinds of things need to be talked about. And often, you know, in the course of a normal lesson, a teacher or a student might not think to even discuss these things because the lesson can take up so much time with so many other important things that one sometimes forgets to talk about some very, very basic things about practicing. So these are the kinds of things that I talk about in this chapter.
Yes, there is a great deal in that chapter, and it's not only the content of the discussion, but I appreciate the approach that you've taken, which is always respecting both the teacher and the student in terms of their experiences, rather than trying to. There are books and methods that we're all familiar with, particularly in classical guitar world, that essentially try to impose various doctrines that the poor students, then are kind of destined to carry out much of the time to their own detriment, and not to the benefit or expansion of their musical life.
That's very, very important to me, to respect the individuality of both teacher and student. Very important.
It goes back at least as far back as the mid-19th century with Fernando Sora's method, in which he says at the very beginning, essentially, this is a paraphrase, he said, "These are my explorations. I'm not giving you these as orders or as precepts that you must follow, but I encourage you to explore them yourself and to see what you think about them." And I think in mid-19th century, that was an astonishingly modern viewpoint, which for some reason never really caught on to a lot of different schools of guitar or approaches to the guitar. That's a different subject.
Yes, right. And I love that point of view, of course. And I think the problem often is with disciples of one sort or another. They often get a little too rigid in their understanding of the original master's approach. More often than not, the original one is the one who says, look, you can take this or leave it, or you can use this as a springboard for your own ideas, but that's only a realistic approach to take, I think, towards teaching.
Oh, yes, definitely. So the last chapter is some of your thoughts about preparing for a concert. And that is a very important subject, and that's very different. That's not just the same as practicing hard. So could you guide us a little bit through that?
Well, this is the most personal of the chapters. The subject matter is the most personal, really, because everybody is completely different in terms of how they approach a concert closer to the time of the concert. I try to give a general guide of at least questions to be asking, with some observations about things that one may or may not have thought of before. For example, letting go is a very important part of practice. And particularly as the closer you get to a concert, you have to learn to let go. You can't be practicing every little minute detail right up until the day before the concert. So the closer you get to a concert, the more you want to feel and hear and see the big picture. And so there are ways to think about that, as I discuss in the book, as well as things to think about the day of a concert, things to pay attention to. Again, these are things that are so incredibly personal, and everyone is absolutely different from everyone else. But I bring up a subject, for instance, that most people don't think about, and not everybody is affected by, but many are, and many don't know they are. And that's the issue of hypoglycemia, which is a response to low blood sugar, or again, not getting enough protein, or getting too much carbohydrate. Depends on the person completely. I have this issue very clearly, and it affects me deeply the day of a concert. And it can make or break a concert: when I eat before a concert, what I eat before a concert. And so I felt it was important to discuss those things in the book in an open way. It's a sort of a confessional thing on my part, but I think that I represent quite a number of people, in fact, who may not even be aware that they have this issue. And so if it is an issue for you, it's probably good that I've discussed it. If it isn't an issue, just glide over it and go to the next thing. But those kinds of things are what I do when I get to a concert hall. Those kinds of things, I can only offer what I do and suggest that you think about what you need and what do you do.
Exactly.
And then also the last part of the chapter is a rewriting of an article that I wrote some years ago for American String Teacher magazine on performance anxiety that has proved popular and helpful to many people. And I thought it would be a nice way to end the book, because again, it's a way of approaching your concert and your performance nerves with the idea of making it easier, just with ease.
Well, I agree. That was very nice that you included those chapters on relaxed and effective practice and preparing for a concert, because in my experience of your book, that fulfills the journey through the book, because you identify from the root of the body, the nature of movement, mechanics of movement of left and right hand and so forth. And all of those things go together, so that if you have this, if you have these perspectives, then as you work in your musical life, if you happen to be giving concerts, you will always have a way to reach back into a nice reservoir of knowledge that this book contains, and then find those places or rediscover those places in the book that may apply to your particular situation. They're all interconnected, and that's something that, because of what you've written here, comes across, I hope, very clearly to everybody.
Well, that's lovely. I couldn't have expressed all that any better myself, so thank you, Jeff.
Yeah. Well, David, this has been an amazing and helpful discussion. I'm so glad that you in Manhattan and me in Los Angeles could make this connection using internet technology to converse and really explore your book. I highly recommend it to all people who are really interested in the guitar, teachers, students, and even people outside of the guitar. I think will find that there are things in here that they can benefit from exploring. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope that we reconnect soon. But David, it's been great conversing with you today.
Thank you, Jeff, so much. I really appreciate your featuring me on this, and appreciate your very open-minded and observant observations about the book and my work. That really means a lot to me. So thanks again.
Wonderful.
Thank you.